Hi, everyone. Thanks for your patience with this. It's going to be three talks in one about the Upwork Uprising, as we're calling it, ethical vibe coding, vibe design thinking, and potentials for jobs. But let me just skip to this is my question. I've been saying in 2026, why are we saying there are no jobs when there is so much work to be done, in this world to make the world a better place? So why are we saying there's no jobs when there is a tremendous amount of work to be done in front of us, as we can all see? So let's talk about three things in this one lesson. ChatGPT and the human resistance. What is the potential of vibe coding? And what is it? I'll just do a quick one and you can look it up. Two, what are the concerns about vibe coding and AI generated app making? And three, what is vibe design thinking, which is kind of a term I'm putting together, which is a mix of vibe coding and design thinking. So I'll explain what that is. And I think it could be a great career for non-developers in the global South and the West. And that's actually the first video I was going to make because I've met so many people the last few years who are having an incredibly hard time finding a job. Everyone from junior developers who've just finished school with computer science degrees and feeling like they can't use any of that. Again, people getting out of school in marketing. I work with an editor who, after a great 10-year career, is having a hard time finding editing jobs. We work with a group for queer refugees. I'll just put a shout out because I just think they're amazing people. Justin Hilton with his organization, Safe Place International. So this is a little bit of a shout out to them and what I'd love to keep exploring with them and see if it works. And including a queer trans refugee from South Sudan who's resettled in Canada and trying to figure out what their next career move would be. So I feel like this is sort of the answer for everyone, and that's how this video got started. Okay, so first, what is the potential of vibe coding and what is it? In a nutshell, it's the idea that just suddenly, kind of overnight, this technology got very, very good. First, people who were writing computer code were using a thing like Cursor to just help them write code better. So as soon as ChatGPT got big, one of the biggest use cases that a lot of people didn't know about is people were using it to help them write code. And it was incredible. I even did a thing where as a layperson, I was looking at like tech support tickets related to machine learning and things that were absolutely incomprehensible to me. I could suddenly understand. We were all using it for troubleshooting and it was just doing some incredible stuff. And then, so that was 2023. And now by 2026, and especially in the last few months of 2025 and just when it became 2026, all of a sudden we had just really tipped. And people were really able to just use Claude to describe what they wanted. And so the example I always give to people who don't know what it is you can say like, hey, I want an app that pings me 5 times a day, keeps me motivated on my diet or, whatever I'm trying to do. And you just sort of type that in and say, ask me a few questions about how it would work. It asks you a few questions, then boom. I mean, it's the interface. It's, the actual code. And then, we're still, over the next 2 years, we're still going to need a lot of developers to put this into production. But we'll get into the ethics and all that stuff. But right now, that's what you need to know, is that vibe coding is a thing where you just sort of say what you want the app to do, and it just does it. And if that sounds incredible and too good to be true, maybe it is. So that's what this video is about. So we've got this thing called vibe coding, which has tremendous potential and would allow like regular non-coders to make apps, someday very, very soon, like this year. But so the next thing is, what are the concerns about vibe coding and AI generated apps? And this is what I've kind of discovered just by talking to developers. And this gets into some of the ethics of it. So here's the example I give when it comes to video, AI video generation, as opposed to just vibe coding, because this kind of makes it a little more stark. So say you've got a person in Poland who wants to do AI generated video and, has to buy all these expensive tools. So that's the first problem with it. These tools are very, very expensive. And especially if you're in the global South, what's $20 a month in America isn't that bad. But I will say in America, even when we start getting into $200 a month, that's starting to get very expensive for Americans, especially when you want a handful of these tools. So it's very easy to find yourself spending $1,000 a month on AI tools. And so it's a huge cost. And then when you look at the global South, it's prohibitive. But anyway, to go back to my example. So you've got the person in Poland who's doing generative AI video. And then you've got a kid who went to NYU in America, has wealthy parents. The parents just want the kid to get a job in film. And so they tell the kid, like, look, if the kid goes, Mom and Dad, I need $1,000 in video generating tools to launch my film career after my $100,000 or $300,000 degree at NYU in filmmaking, which is all, maybe over, but that's a different video. Anyway, and so that kid gets the $1,000 a month tools. He's got all these incredible tools. And so the question is, with ethical, vibe coding and AI generated projects, that's really not fair. It's not fair to have somebody in Poland not be able to afford these tools and frankly not be able to compete. So let's take that on another level and let's talk about vibe coding. I was working with a group out of Pakistan, and they were really the ones who explained to me that they were spending hundreds of dollars on an app. And so the significance of this is important because a few years ago, if somebody in Pakistan wanted to make an app and they were competing on Upwork with someone in the United States who wanted to make an app, the tools were essentially free. JavaScript, PHP, CSS, HTML, building websites. It was pretty equal. But now this is very disruptive technology. So now instead of a person sitting there for 3 or 4 weeks, you can just generate it, but you do pay for what they call the compute, which is the processing power and all the hard drives we're talking about spinning and all these data centers. So somebody does have to pay for that. And so I just saw a really neat app out of this place. I'm in Los Alamos, but the guy was like, yeah, I made this in, a day, but it did cost me $200. So that's when we're talking about these ethical things. And what that's also going to do is that, there were already a tremendous amount of people on Upwork. I think there's something like, according to what I've seen, 6 million accounts total on Upwork, which is a gig site, if you don't know it, and then 3 million active accounts. So they have this huge problem with that when somebody posts something. Before there used to be, literally millions of people who could have done the job. And now there's, tons of people are doing these jobs themselves because they have AI and things like ChatGPT. And so, there's just tons and tons of people, looking for jobs, and the jobs are getting less. And then what was the shocking discovery that I'm very grateful to have these developers in Nairobi and Pakistan helping me understand all this is that what I was shocked to find out is that Upwork is charging people to apply for jobs. It's not a cash thing. You buy these things called credits, but these credits can really, really add up. They can be very expensive. What's $5 to somebody in India is, $25, $30 equivalent in the United States. And if you think about that per job, and when you have a very, very small chance of actually winning the gig, you can just see how expensive this would become. And then interestingly, on really expensive jobs, like if you're looking for legal help or something, those people are paying like $50 to apply for your ad. And we'll talk about the Upwork Uprising, but one of the reforms we want is that Upwork needs to let clients know that people are paying to apply for your job. I would have done things very, very different. I would have had the door open if people had clarifying questions. I would have closed jobs very quickly. There's a lot of jobs I wouldn't have posted in the first place, and we'll get into that in a minute. But anyway, so that's the concern, is that we're talking about equal access to opportunities. And this thing has a huge potential of really just throwing that off. And the rich are going to get richer and the poor are going to get poorer. Okay, so that's the concern. And so that was a whole video that I just did in 1 or 2 slides. So, but what is the good side of this? And so the original video I did was called What is, Vibe Design Thinking? So first I'll explain what is design thinking, what is design planning. So design planning, if you ever go to like a pretentious thing like Burning Man or whatever, you're going to meet all sorts of design thinking people. And they tend to be, I won't say anything more bad about them, but they tend to go to grad school. And it's this idea that you really think things through and plan things out and talk to users before you just forge ahead with a plan, which seems pretty intuitive. But anyway, it's a whole master's degree and it's a big thing. And a lot of those people ended up going into what they call user experience design, which is, again, really checking in with users before you build a new website or you build a new tool to make sure that they're actually going to find it useful and use it. And so that's what design thinking and design planning is. But so here's the opportunity, and this is what I want to particularly highlight, again, the amazing Justin Hilton. He just put out a new podcast. Really want to point everybody towards that. As I was, the Dusoma Foundation was helping queer people in Africa. People are like, do you know Justin Hilton? And so anyway, so we ended up connecting on a few different levels. And I talked to some of the staff. And what I'd like to talk to them about is that when we think about jobs for people who graduate from the Dream Academy, what we're really seeing is that you don't have to be a coder at this point because of vibe coding. You don't have to be a coder to really talk to people about how technology can change their lives. And so one example of something we're working on now is that we're looking at refugees who don't know where they stand with UNHCR, don't know what's going to happen to them in terms of resettlement. And the question we're asking is there any technology outside of just getting a smartphone? Is there any technology or app that can help with this? And the only people who can really, really speak to this are, the refugees themselves, people who work with UNHCR, so that's where I think there's the job because, for those of us in the United States who've never spent 1 minute being a refugee, how could we possibly know what refugees need, in an area like East Africa or South Sudan? So that's what I think is the really, really huge opportunity is that they can be subject matter experts. And so if somebody's wanting to help a flower shop in Nairobi have online deliveries, no one's better than the local developer at, talking to them, figuring out what they need. And then if we could do this thing with the ethical job board, which is again going to be another video, the potential of that. So then we'd have this potential of local people helping their own local economies, and it wouldn't be, people just naturally going on Upwork and using that system. So if we did an ethical job board, we'd have this whole thing about like local stuff. Okay, so the cost problem, this is just some additional information. I have on the screen Claude, Replit, Lovable Devon. You're welcome to look them all up. They all run about $20. Well, they have some free tiers, but they end quick. Then they have a next tier that's about $20 a month, and then they quickly go to $200 a month. My tale of woe is just this week, after fighting it for a long time, I had to move up to the $200 a month ChatGPT. It said I was out of memory. I do not have the time right now to be downloading and restructuring my synthetic institutional memory to use less bandwidth. And so right now I'm stuck paying it. And that is really the problem. And that's our concern. We would like to have this job board be sponsored by these companies. So anyway, so let's put this all together, and I'll just briefly say, what is the Upwork Uprising? It would be ethical vibe coding. So it means that it's sponsored, and then everybody has equal access to the tools. It's not about the person who has the most money to put into a project and the most money to apply for jobs. We would have other ways that people could work hard, and they would have to work hard. Like we're not going to be able to help 3 million developer firms like get jobs overnight. It's still going to be getting to know each other, building communities. We'd like to do some group projects that help people shine. We'd like to have tipping systems and things like that. So the Upwork Uprising is, just in summary, just two simple things. One is that we are asking for reforms of Upwork. Please do not do some of these things. Upwork can make or break you. If you have one crappy client, just like Uber in America, you have one client who complains about you and they do not give you the benefit of the doubt. They can knock you off the platform. Upwork is also just getting worse and worse and worse. I suddenly had a credit card problem on their side. They kicked me off the platform for a little bit. They canceled my project. I couldn't get in touch with my developer. It was pretty awful. And then they had a great AI chat support system. And so I kept saying, like, you canceled my project. And it kept saying, glad we were able to help. And I was like, no, you didn't help. And they were like, glad we were able to help. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the future of AI chatbots. So so the part one is Upwork reform. Part two is a new ethical job board. And that would be, we're just trying to put together the steering committee and starting to get some leadership on it, get some attention. If we can get sponsorship from any of these vibe coding companies, that could be something that really differentiates us. Because if you could come on our site and get free licenses for particular projects, that would be, I think, quite popular. And then last, I will close with, again, when I'm saying, why are we saying there are no jobs when there's so much work to be done? And so I'm going to point you to a Reddit thread called Enshittification, which is based on Cory Doctorow's book that came out last year called Enshittification. And he talks about, I think the subtitle of the book is Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It. And I argue a little bit that things have been bad for a while. This is not like, he talks about the good old internet, and the good old internet was not good for a lot of people, and the internet is certainly not working at all for a billion people who can't afford phones and can't afford computers or internet. But what I do think is two things about the enshittification movement, because we've been tagging a lot of our stuff with that to talk about it, but it's all these examples of software that's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And we really feel like, to put this all together, there is a tremendous potential for making new, more affordable software that's not in the spirit of greed and for profit. Like I talk about Punchbowl, which was a free thing that would send out email invites. And all it would basically do is send an email and then just sort of track your RSVPs. This is not $30 a month software. You know what I mean? It's just not. And so I think there's tremendous opportunity to rethink some of these old tools that used to work or things that just need reform. And with vibe coding, like, we can make something pretty similar, and it won't violate anybody's thing because it's going to be different. It's hopefully going to be better, but we do have the possibility. So again, when we say like, oh, there's no jobs, there is plenty to do. And the other thing I'll say last in summary is that we're talking about enshittification prevention, which is that what we are concerned about is that if you think Claude and Devon and Replit are expensive now, do a little research, because they're going to get a lot more expensive. It's just like Uber in that they're launching, they want to get people hooked onto their platform, they want to keep everybody's code, and you can't really update your software anymore without them. And what are they going to do? Just like ChatGPT, all of a sudden, it's not working anymore. Suddenly, you have to upgrade to the $200 version. And so, like, will the $200 version of Claude become $500? And what do we have to protect ourselves from that kind of pricing? Okay, and the last thing I'll say is to end on a little bit of a dour note. There is going to be a lot of disruption in the industry. And I talked to a developer I was working with about 6 months ago who had helped us with the website. We were using WordPress, which is getting worse and worse and worse. And the developer had used a plugin called Elementor. And then all of a sudden, my website's not working. And it's because Elementor wants us to upgrade to paid, and they want $5 a month for the header of my website. And I'm like, are you kidding? Then not only do I not have to go back to this developer anymore, I just go into Claude or ChatGPT and say, hey, how do I fix this? I don't want to use Elementor. What can I do with like Wonder Blocks? How do we fix this? And it's fixed. So again, this disruption in the technology industry is really, really deep. It's really, really important. And I'm going to end with the thing that I've said in almost every single one of these videos, ChatGPT and the human resistance. Don't just boycott, build, because if you think that just boycotting all this stuff, it's just going to keep you safe. And I hope this is an okay thing and I don't get censored for using this example. But what I always say is, thinking you can just boycott AI and it's going to go away is like boycotting a gun during wartime and thinking it's going to keep you from getting shot. Other people can use AI against you. So it's not enough to just say, I'm going to boycott this. I'm not going to use this. I'm going to, and I'm even just as in the last 90 days, talking to a lot of developers who used to hate this stuff, and they're now all using it. And I've met some really diehard people. And somebody I talked to recently said, the only jobs out there are debugging vibe code now. And so like putting your head in the sand and trying to ignore this stuff. And so that's what this class, ChatGPT and the Human Resistance, is all about, is that what do you do with a technology that has some problems and it has some potential? And what do you do? And so that's the work of the Dusoma Foundation. And that is the conclusion of this video. Thanks for watching.